Welcome to The Jury is Out, a podcast for trial attorneys who want to sharpen their skills and better serve their clients. Your co-hosts are John Simon, founder of the Simon Law Firm, and St. Louis attorney Eric Veith.
Welcome to The Jury is Out, and with me today are three of the young attorneys from our office, Elizabeth McNulty, Paul Tahan, and Megan Crow. And today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic, and that is something I know very little about and they know all about, and that is surviving the first few years of your legal career, of your practice. So with that, what I'd like to do is go around the table and have each of you tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
My name is Elizabeth McNulty. I'm originally from a little town in western Kentucky called Owensboro, Kentucky. I went to the University of Kentucky for undergrad and then came to St. Louis to go to WashU for law school. I've wanted to be an attorney for a really long time, and I was fortunate enough to land a law clerk position here at the Simon Law Firm after my first year of law school. I fell in love with the work that we do here, and I was also lucky enough to be offered a full-time position when I became an attorney in 2019. So I just entered my third year of practice. I work mainly with Tim Cronin. We do a lot of med mal, product liability, catastrophic injury cases. It's really interesting work. You become an expert in a lot of things I never thought that I would learn about, like how a toilet functions, how
You have to tell us
work.
a little more about that later.
I will, definitely. So it's great. I love working here, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. But your first few years can be difficult, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little more later.
I'm Megan Crow. I'm originally from Edwardsville, Illinois, and that's about 30 minutes outside of St. Louis, for those of you who are not familiar with it. I went to undergrad at the University of Alabama, and then I came back to St. Louis University for law school. I clerked here at the Simon Law Firm after my first year of law school. Loved it, had a great experience. And then for my first year and a half of practice, I was at a large defense firm in St. Louis, and it was always in my heart to come back to the plaintiff's side. I finally found my way back to the Simon Law Firm in January of this year. So I've been here for about 9 months now and loving it. I work closely with Johnny Simon, John's son, and we do a lot of motor vehicle accidents and product liability cases.
All right, Paul?
My name is Paul Tahan, and I was born and raised in St. Louis. Went to Rockhurst University in Kansas City for undergrad, came back to St. Louis to go to St. Louis University for law school. I've been with the Simon Law Firm for about 3 years now, the first 2 as a clerk, and then I became an attorney when I graduated. I work with Tony Simon, and we do intellectual property, so patent, trademark, copyright, those kinds of cases. And we also do a lot of commercial litigation and whistleblower cases, all of which I find very interesting. So I've been an attorney for about a year now doing that.
So you guys are really early on in your career. And so, Elizabeth, you said you graduated in 2019?
Yes.
Okay. And then, Megan, when did you graduate?
Also in 2019.
2019. Okay. So both of you have 2 years behind you, and you starting your third year, right?
Yep, that's
correct.
And then, Paul, what about you? Was it 2020?
2020.
Okay. So 2020. So you've just completed your first year and starting your second year,
That's
right?
correct.
What I want to do is start out by having each of you tell us a little bit about what's the best part of your job and what's the worst part of your job, or some of the things that aren't so good about it.
Funny enough, I think my best and worst is the same thing. One of the things I love the most about this job, and I think it will continue on, is that we are constantly learning. I'm learning new stuff every day, especially in your first few years of practice, constantly being challenged. But especially in this field of work, like I touched on earlier, we become experts in our cases and whatever the case is about. And that will continue on for as long as we're doing this. So we have a products case involving a toilet. And so I've had to learn a lot of engineering design about toilets, going through documents, stuff like that. So
You got to tell us what happened with the toilet.
the toilet, it's a products case. Our client was installing the thing that makes the toilet flush. It's a plastic vessel inside the toilet, and the way it was designed and manufactured, when our client was installing it, it blew up in his face, shattered the porcelain tank, and injured him pretty seriously. So I've had to learn a lot about why the product was defective, going through design documents, things like that. And that's, those documents are certainly pretty dense. I don't necessarily have an engineering background, but you do what you have to do in this job and you just learn as much as you can about it. You talk to your expert about it. And so you also become an expert in that field for a little while, at least. I'm not sure I'll have a lifelong interest and knowledge base in how toilets function.
The toilet explosion specialist.
Exactly. But I think that's really interesting. But the downside of that is it's really challenging and it can become really exhausting to constantly have to learn new things. And it can be really stressful in the first few years when you're kind of getting the hang of, you don't really know how to do anything coming out of law school. And I think that that's really hard at first to kind of adjust to constantly learning and constantly being really stressed out, quite frankly.
And the other thing too is everything that you do the first year or 6 months or even 2 years, almost all of it is you're doing it for the first or second time, and it takes you a crazy amount of time to do it. Think about preparing for your first expert's deposition. And again, the more time you spend, the better. Preparation is key, but the whole learning curve, it might take you 2 or 3 days, the first time around, and to do the same good job, you could do it the second time in half the time, maybe even, less. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So, all right, Megan?
For me, the best part is having my feet put to the fire and being in courtrooms and doing hearings and taking depositions every day and really getting a feel for the courtroom. And at the same time, that can be the worst part because it's the part that I have the least experience with. And, in law school, I know how to write memos and write and research. And I don't know how to, be in front of a judge. And so at the same time, that is both my favorite part and also the most scary part because it's the most unfamiliar.
So Megan, let me ask you this. So when you started 9 months ago,
Mm-hmm.
How long were you here before you took your first deposition?
I think it was about 2 weeks.
2 weeks. All right. And then you also tried a case, right?
In the first 5 months.
Okay. All right. So anyway, that's off to a good start. To me, I think, the worst thing of all is wasted talent. Everything you learn from here on out, you're going to be learning by doing. And that's really what you need to do. Wasted talent is the worst thing in the world. And I will tell you guys, if I haven't already, and I tell everybody else here, if you ever feel like you're not being challenged here and pushed to your abilities, come down and see me, bang on my door, and we will fix that. So it is so true. Watching is one thing, and you can watch and learn, but you really need to jump in and do it. That's how you really learn. Paul, what about you?
So the things that Elizabeth and Megan said were two of my favorite things. So I kind of want to cover something kind of different that's kind of more unique to what we do specifically. And in my day-to-day, my clients are all engineers or artists, or they're physicians or other skilled practices to where they're basically experts in their field. And it's something that they're really passionate about and something they know a lot about. And something that I really enjoy about the job is learning from our clients about their specific area and what makes their job go through the day-to-day, and learning the different complexities of different products or different inventions and that sort of thing, and learning it from somebody who's really an expert or the expert in that field. That's something that I find very rewarding and I think is very interesting.
And one of the things too, I think here versus I started at a defense firm. I worked 4.5 years at one of the bigger defense firms here in St. Louis. Great experience and all of that, but you just didn't get to do the same kind of things that you do at a firm like ours, or, a smaller firm, a plaintiff's firm, or just, I guess, a smaller firm. I was there 4.5 years and, didn't get a whole lot of client contact. You weren't the lead attorney on a lot of cases. I think I waited, way too long before I was thrown in taking depositions. And that was really the most frustrating thing for me was, wanting to do more and being what I thought held back a little bit. Believe me here, you won't be, we're trying to hold you back. We're trying to push you forward here. Okay. And I've had an experience, and I know it's kind of the structure and organization of a firm with 120 lawyers and different levels and partners and junior partners, and they've got a client they've had for 40 years, and the client wants some continuity. So you're not going to be going and meeting with the client and doing certain things. I get that. I understand it. But I would say to our listeners, whether you've been out 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, push really hard. You really have to fight to get to do things. If there are things you want to do, you want to try more cases, you want to be able to take more significant role in the case, it's not going to happen at most places just sitting there. I mean, you got to make some noise. You got to first of all, you got to show the partner that you're working for that, you have the ability and the confidence to be able to do it. You do that by showing good work, but you're doing yourself a disservice. If you're not learning something every week, every day, every month, pushing to learn something new, that's what it's all about. The learning begins when you get out of law school. The listeners have heard this from me before. Getting that law degree and passing the bar is like somebody giving you the keys to a brand new shiny sports car and you've never driven before. You can get in it and you can wreck it, or you can have somebody show you how to drive it, and drive it effectively and efficiently. And really that's it. I was very, very lucky because I had attorneys all the way through every firm I've been at who were good lawyers, and they also took the time out to explain things to me. A lot of times it was when I messed something up or made a mistake. Hopefully I didn't do that too often, but if you're not working for somebody who is really going to take the time to show you and teach you, you need to work somewhere else. And I mean that. It doesn't matter salary and all this other stuff and, partnership. You need to be at a place where the person that you're working with is taking the time to help you develop as an attorney. And that's really what it's all about. Paul?
So the worst part of my job, I don't know that this is necessarily the worst. This is definitely the hardest part. And it's the things they don't teach you in law school and also aren't really things that people talk about. Like questions of opposing counsel wants an extension. This is the 4th or 5th time they've wanted an extension. They've got a kind of excuse, their kid is sick. So, you feel like you have to grant it. But it's also clear that they're trying to delay. Like, what do you do in that sort of situation? Or situations where you have a client who has a problem that needs to be solved, but it's not something you can handle. What do you do in those kinds of situations? And I think learning how to handle a situation where it's not a question of legal skill or legal talent or taking a deposition or doing something like that, but where it's a question of interpersonal skills, a professional relationship between you and especially somebody who you don't work with, that has been something that I have felt is challenging and has had a steep learning curve.
And what class is that taught in law school?
I think I must have slept through that one.
I mean, that's really a good point. I mean, that's the kind of thing day to day that, you don't learn anything in law school about that. And, for instance, I really, the habits that I developed them in my first year or two of practice. I worked with, an attorney, Paul Brown, who's still in town and practicing. We didn't always agree on things, but boy, he did it by the book. I mean, he was very organized and, taught me a good work ethic and, no stone unturned and just to be very thorough and, not leave anything to chance. And that was really no shortcuts. I mean, no shortcuts. And so, I learned that early on that, you take everything very seriously and, look at everything you need to look at. I've been lucky. I went from that firm then to the next firm, and I've always had attorneys who took the time to teach me and help me. And I think I've tried. I hope I've done a decent job of trying to pass that on also, with the lawyers that are here.
I think that's certainly the number one tip for surviving your first year or two of practice is to find not just one, but several important mentors and mentors in different places in their career. Have someone maybe a year or two ahead of you who you can ask the little questions, and then have mentors who are later in their career to ask maybe some of the bigger questions. I know it's certainly helped me, and having the attorney I work with, Johnny, as a mentor has been really helpful. Paul, exactly what you said, some of those interpersonal skills that you can't really learn in a class. It's been really helpful for me to observe my mentors in those situations, whether it be just talking to opposing counsel after hearing about the possibility of a settlement or a mediation, things that I wouldn't necessarily know how to handle myself at first. It's helpful to watch someone do it once and then kind of learn from there.
So, when we got together, we talked about this podcast. One of the things that I asked each of you to do is to, shoot me an email with some of the topics that you think would be good topics for discussion based on, surviving or getting through your first couple years, what you need to know in your first couple years of practice. And so what I'd like to do is go through some of them with you. And the one of them we kind of already started, and that's the mentorship, the importance of mentorship. It is just so important. Paul?
I agree. It's definitely important. And one thing that I felt really valuable about working here is it's not just Tony Simon, who I feel I can go to and ask a question. If I have a question, I feel like I can walk into any attorney's office, and they've always been more than happy to help me. Even if it's a stupid question, I've walked into Megan's office and been like, hey, I know this is a stupid question. I should probably know this, but it's one of those things where, especially with the soft skills and with the things that you don't learn in law school, it's the only way to really learn it. Calling it a shortcut isn't good, but knowing when to ask questions and who to ask the question of is hugely valuable. It really makes it a lot easier and a lot more fun to learn what you're doing.
Well, and I think the tricky thing about mentorship is it's so much better when it comes organically. I know some bigger firms assign you a mentor, and, that just doesn't always work out. You're introduced to, some guy named Joe, and you have nothing in common, and he knows nothing about you, and you try to force it, and it just doesn't work. So I think that making that happen organically, and I think that the way I was able to do that is you do good work. You always say yes when you're asked if there's something that you can do in a case, and then that builds trust, so that person wants to help you, because it's kind of a give and take. Everyone knows we're really busy people, so sometimes more experienced lawyers don't necessarily want to take the time to answer your silly questions or teach you how to do something, but that's so important to not only the younger lawyer that they're helping, but to them, because the more I know how to do, the less that person has to do in their day-to-day, because they can trust me to handle more stuff. So I think that if you can find someone that you really get along with and you can identify that they want to help you too, that will lead to a really long-lasting relationship with that person.
One of the most important things along those lines in a mentor is someone who will give you those opportunities to do things that you've never done before and then counsel you along the way. I know that's certainly been the case for me here, and it's certainly been extremely valuable.
And you should ask questions. There is no question about that. You need to get in and get some feedback and ask questions. And, a good way to do that I see a lot of the lawyers here do is, instead of going to somebody's office 6-7 times a day, make a list of things that you want to cover. So be respectful, of their time also. But the other thing that's even more important, have a solution before you ask the question. Figure it out yourself, because you don't want to get into a habit of not analyzing it yourself, not coming up with a solution. And then, you go in and, okay, what do I do here? Give me the answer. That's not the way it should happen. You need to have already analyzed it, figured it out, and said, look, hey, there's 3 things I can do here, and I want to do this one because this is the reason. To me, I spend a whole lot of my time talking with the other lawyers about things, and even the older lawyers will come in. Amy will come in every other week or so with a list of 5 or 6 things that she wants to talk about, and I do the opposite of what my advice is. I just barge into somebody's office when as soon as something pops up. But it's so important to get feedback, and even if you don't have a specific question, it's good when you take a deposition, especially if it's your first or second or third or whatever. Give it to the attorney that you're working with, and they're going to look at it anyway eventually, and just tell them, give me some feedback on this. It is amazing how much I can tell about an attorney's level of experience and their skill level by just reading a deposition. It is attorneys I've never met, never laid eyes on them, and I will read 3 or 4 of their depositions, and I will have formed some very, very strong opinions about their abilities. Just, I'll read some of them and go, wow, this person, they got their stuff together and they know what they're doing, because you can see what it is it's telling you their thought process in cases. So anyway, ask for feedback. So getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And one of you put that down. What are we talking about there?
Yeah, so this was mine. I think we've already touched on it a little bit, but in your first year or 2 of practice, you're always going to be doing things for the first time. You're constantly being put in situations that you've never been in before, and that can be a scary or uncomfortable thing. And I think a good piece of advice is get comfortable with being uncomfortable and be flexible, and just kind of accept that while it's scary at first, it's not always going to be the case. And soon you're going to be a pro at taking depositions. And it's important to be flexible and be prepared. And like John said, it might take you a lot longer to prepare for something the first time, but then after that, you'll cut your preparation time in half. And, there's a certain level of fake it till you make it.
Yeah. And I'll tell you the other thing too, is don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you're going to make mistakes. And that's why you have other lawyers. We don't take brand new lawyers and throw them into a case without some, guidance and supervision. I mean, if that happens, please let me know because we shouldn't be doing that. Look, you're going to make mistakes. There is no question you're going to make mistakes. And the real issue is, what did you learn from the mistake? Okay. And I say this often that you really don't know how to prepare a case until you've tried a case. Even taking a deposition, you know the basics, you know what the issues are, but until you've gone into court and you're trying to cross-examine a witness whose depo that you took, and they're, weaseling out of the question, you're thinking, why didn't I guess I get, they're able to, change their testimony to some extent, and you really didn't pin them down. I remember the first few times I was in trial, and my depositions, a lot of them were worthless because it was more like a casual conversation. And I'm thinking, I didn't really pin them down on the important points. And so you really need to see, once you see firsthand how that deposition is used and how it ends up causing problems for you if you don't do it a certain way, it kind of locks you in. I mean, after the first few trials, the next time I took depositions, it was like, no, we ain't leaving here until we get this nailed down. And I'm going to ask you 6 different ways, and because that's what happens. If you get a good admission or something in a deposition, I can guarantee you're going to go to court and they're going to find some way of trying to undo it or explain it or unexplain it or whatever. The next topic is gaining experience from pro bono cases. Megan, was that you?
Yeah, that was also mine. I think this is a really good tip, especially if you're at a larger law firm where you might not be getting that courtroom experience. Usually there's a lot of pro bono cases that are available for younger attorneys to take. And I know for me, in my first year and a half, when I was at the larger defense firm, there wasn't really a lot of opportunities in our regular cases to go to court, but my first time in a courtroom, and actually my only time before I started working here at Simon, being in a courtroom was for a pro bono case. And so it was a really good opportunity for me to get a little bit more experience than I would have gotten otherwise. And, obviously the plus is that you're doing something you can feel good about and that's meaningful.
So the next thing too is this is one of the things obviously that's near the top of the list, and that is preparation, being the most prepared person in the room. Paul, you want to talk about that?
Sure. So that kind of gels with the getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and learning from mistakes, I think, because one of the best ways I've found to make myself feel more comfortable in situations that I'm approaching for the first time is being extremely and probably overly prepared. I know that's one thing that I've heard Tim talk a lot about, and you talk a lot about it too, John, being the most prepared person in the room. And it's not just a thing that helps your client, helps your case be stronger, but it helps you feel better too. So when you have a situation come up and the question becomes, how do you address it? The answer is, well, I've fully prepared for this. I understand what the ramifications of what I'm going to do are, and this is the direction I should proceed. And I feel like when I've walked out of situations where I've been overly prepared versus situations where I haven't been overly prepared, it's the situations where I didn't feel quite as prepared as I needed to be, where I'm like, oh man, I don't know if that was right. I don't know if I should have done something different. I don't know if I should have done X, Y, or Z. But it's a lot easier to be confident in yourself and in your decision-making when you're extremely well prepared.
So I've been playing with my phone while you were talking, and I wasn't being rude. This whole preparation thing kind of struck me. You know how the Vikings especially and the kings of ancient England had sort of nicknames, Alfred the Great, Richard the Lionhearted, and on and on. And one of them just kind of caught me. And that's what I looked up on my phone. It's Ethelred. This is where he reigned from 978 to 1016, I guess the time of the Norman invasion. But it's King Ethelred, and his title, subtitle was Ethelred the Unready. So here we are, 1,006 years from the time he reigned. We still know historically that he was referred to as Ethelred the Unready. I don't know why he wasn't, got that name, but that's not something you want to be known for, is not being ready or not being prepared, because that can really, that's just bad news all the way around. I mean, bad for your client, bad for your case, bad for your reputation. Whatever you need to do to prepare, you do it.
Yeah, I know, especially when I started here, I was new on a lot of cases all at once. And so maybe I just had a status hearing, but I'd take an hour going through that file in full, making sure I knew what stage of the case that we were in, what the issues were in case that anything came up in that status hearing that I needed to address.
Well, and I think I've heard you say, John, that preparedness is the great equalizer. So especially for younger lawyers, when you're walking into a room with a bunch of older, more experienced lawyers, you're going to be nervous and you're going to maybe not feel as confident. But if you're prepared, then that kind of equals the playing field. And you're probably more prepared than they are. I feel like 9 times out of 10, I'm way over prepared. I'm like, well, I didn't need to spend all that time doing it. But you have the ammo going in and it makes you feel better and you do a better job.
You're not going to always be the smartest lawyer at whatever, at a trial or hearing. You're not going to be the most experienced. But you know what? You can be the most prepared. And I agree. It is the game changer. And even now, when I'll handle a motion in a case, and it might be a discovery issue, it's almost embarrassing for me to tell people how much time I spend on motions. I've been practicing for a long time. I make sure I know the case, I know the client's names, I know the issue in before the court won't have anything to do with that a lot of times, and I still know the case backwards and forwards. I need to be able to answer every question, and I do it also because sometimes by looking in a little more detail in the case, you always find something extra, something that you can do, something you weren't thinking about. It might even not relate to the motion, but preparation is it. So here's the other thing too that I want to get your input on, and that is this whole issue of trusting your instincts. And I've worked with lawyers, and I know lawyers who have a tough time making decisions, and they have a tough time making decisions because they're afraid to make the wrong decision. And guess what? You're going to have to make decisions, and some of them are going to be wrong, and some of them are going to be right. And the wonderful thing is you're working with older attorneys who, if you come to the wrong conclusion, they're going to steer you the right way, hopefully. But you can't really be frozen. You've got to make decisions. Not being able to make a decision is just as bad as making the wrong one. It is. You need to trust yourself. What do y'all think about that?
It's something I had a difficult time doing. Maybe in the first year or so of my practice, I felt like I'd be thrown in situations where, maybe my first couple of depositions or hearings, I'd think about doing something or saying something, and maybe I wouldn't necessarily do it. And I'd talk to Tim afterwards, and he'd be like, well, did you do this, this, and this? And I'd be like, well, no, but I thought about it. So I think at that point, you're like, I'm smart, I'm capable, I should do those things because I know what I'm doing. And sometimes I feel like in your first year, you just don't feel like you know what you're doing, but you do, and you're here for a reason. So that was something that I struggled with. And maybe if I'd learned that a little bit sooner, I probably would have been better off. But I think it's part of just your first couple of years of practice and just trusting that you know what you're doing. And because a lot of lawyers don't necessarily know what they're doing, but you do. So I don't know if that's good advice, but I think trusting your instincts is key in this job. And even if you don't know what you're doing, just act like you do. I think that goes a long way.
Here's the thing. You're either going to get it and make enough good decisions that it's going to work out. And if you're incapable of making correct decisions on a consistent basis, better to find out sooner rather than later. And I say that, half jokingly, but I mean, that's what we do. We make decisions all the time. We continually make decisions. And you got to get to the point where you can make one, analyze everything, make it, and move on, live with the result.
Yeah, I think I agree with Elizabeth that this is definitely one of the most difficult parts about being a new attorney for me was learning to trust my instincts. I was kind of laughing. I think the perfect example for me of learning to trust my instincts is defending my first deposition. You can take a deposition and prepare an outline, but there's a certain amount of just unknown when you're defending a deposition of what's going to happen in there. And you don't really learn how to make objections in law school or really anywhere else until you're put in that position. And so learning when to object, learning when to stop a line of questioning, I think was something that I really had to rely on my instincts for. And then you can hone it from there. But I totally agree with Elizabeth. It's one of the most maybe challenging parts of your first few years practice.
There are 2 things that my boss, Tony, told me very early on after I passed the bar and became an attorney that have kind of stuck with me. The first is, I need you to think like a lawyer, which means, approach the situation not as this is an assignment or an issue, but this is part of a bigger whole. And the second thing he told me that's really helped me make decisions and feel more confident and trusting my instincts is there's pretty much no mistake you can make unless you blow a statute of limitations that we can't fix, which I've made mistakes and I found that to be the case. And the other thing that I found to be the case is that courts and opposing counsel are generally understanding, especially if it's for a younger attorney. So I think the trusting your instincts thing is that it's partially a learning and a knowledge thing, and it's also a comfort thing. And that was something that helped me become a lot more comfortable and a lot more willing to trust what I thought was right.
So I'm going to tell you all a story. When I started practicing early on in my career, I worked with an attorney who later ended up becoming my partner for 10 years. And he was 10 years older than me. And he used to tell me a story of when he started practicing, there was an older lawyer who was probably 30 years older than him. And this is many, many years ago. And one of the first things he did, he wrote a brief for this attorney that he was working for. It was his boss. And he told me the story of how he walked into his boss's office and put this brief that he'd worked so hard on the desk. A little bit later, his partner called him in and said, hey, please come down here. And he didn't say anything to him. He picked up the brief and he tore it in half right in front of him, just tore it in half and then threw it on the floor and didn't say anything. And the attorney, my former partner, just was like, what the hell? And turned around and walked out. And, there's a certain way to constructive criticism, and I don't think that qualifies as constructive criticism.
Brutal.
But I hope things have gotten a lot better nowadays than it was. And it was a little bit like that too when I started, a little bit, people were less concerned with, feelings, I guess. And, it was like people were more, hard-edged and things, or kind of like a hard ass. But I think that never does any good at all. It just sends people back, way back. It creates, issues and personality clashes. But that being said, I have trouble taking any kind of criticism. I always have, no matter what. And I get a lot of criticism, especially from my wife. It's hard to take criticism, but you're not always going to be with someone, you're working for someone who's, very good with constructive ways of criticizing you. Okay. And I'm sure that some of you have run into that. How do you handle situations when the criticism is maybe not justified, or it's a little too harsh or overboard, and trying to understand that criticism is good in a way? What advice can you give our listeners about that, on how to handle criticism of all kinds?
Well, I think criticism isn't always easy for anyone to take. I think you'd be kidding yourself if you're like, I love receiving criticism. But for me, I've always, maybe you are upset about it in the moment, but I always try to take a step back and realize that for better or for worse, no matter how it was presented to me, if I think about it afterwards, after I've calmed down, I know that this was given to me to make me a better attorney and a better person. And so I just always try and put it into the perspective of, I'm going to be stronger on the other side of this.
I think constructive criticism is a part of life, and it's going to be a really difficult part of your first couple of years. I think that most attorneys are perfectionists. We don't like making mistakes, and especially in what we do, we were probably in the top of everything we've ever done, and we don't like to make mistakes. So it's really hard when someone's like, yeah, you really screwed that up. This isn't what I wanted. I had to make a lot of edits, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes it's not said in the nicest of ways because what we do is high stakes and there's not necessarily time to, make huge corrections, things like that. And I think whenever I get criticism that isn't given in the nicest way possible, I just try to take myself out of it and not make it about me, but about whatever it is that I was doing. It's a learning lesson, and the criticism isn't about you as a person or your character or even the value you're bringing to your team, but it's just in an effort to make you better, but really whatever it is you're doing better, because it's at the end of the day, it's for the client and it's to make the case better. So you can use it as a tool to make yourself a better lawyer, but it's not about you. So try not to take it so personally. And I know that that's easier said than done, but as soon as I started to realize that and tell that to myself after I had an uncomfortable conversation about maybe something I hadn't done so well, realizing that it wasn't about me and not taking that on so personally, I think really helps.
I have 3 things that I feel apply, especially in cases where criticism might be a bit more brusque or a bit not as constructive as you would normally hope.
That's saying it kindly.
The first is to piggyback off of what Elizabeth said. It's not personal. It's easy to look at a project or the thing you're receiving criticism on and see the hours worth of work that you put into it, or how you stayed up late working on it, got to work early, and it took days, and it's your baby. It's this project, and you did the best you absolutely can do, only to get it back with not perhaps the reception you had hoped. But it's not a reflection on the work you did or the time it took you. It's a reflection on, the ultimate belief of generally an attorney who's more experienced than you are as to what the most valuable thing for the case and for the client is. So it's never a personal thing. And that kind of gels with not reading too much into it. Because again, for the person reviewing the work, it's not looking at it and saying, oh, this took a ton of time. It's looking at it and saying, this is where the case needs to go. This is where this is. It's not where we need to go to get to the point where the case can move to where it needs to be. And it's really easy, where you've poured a lot of heart into something, to look at it and think, this is a reflection on me, when it's not a reflection on you. It's a reflection on the final work product. And those two things, you need to keep those two things distinct.
The other thing too that we need to mention, or I'd like to mention, is the flip side of that. Taking criticism and how to handle it. And believe me, you're going to get criticized, whether it's somebody you're working for, or from a court or a judge, or whatever. But you need to be able to handle it. And I think you guys summed it up pretty well. And that is, try not to take it personally. And boy, I do all the time. I still have trouble with that. But you want to learn from it and move on. And there might be some instances where the criticism isn't justified. I've seen those firsthand, where maybe the younger, less experienced attorney pretty much is right. And I agree with them. And, you need to be careful about how you handle that and be tactful and so forth. And it kind of goes both ways. But the other thing is the sharing the praise or the success. Fortunately for us, we were successful quite a bit, and we get praised for getting good results in cases, or winning a motion, or winning an appeal. You got to always include everybody that did any work on that. When I get done with a trial, and I hope I've done this every single case, I make it a point one-on-one to thank everybody that had anything to do with that case, whether it's our tech person or the paralegals that worked on it, or whoever it was. To literally call them or go down to their office and talk to them, because there's nothing we do that we can do by ourselves here. It's really a team effort. So many good things will come out of that. If you're part of a case and that case gets tried and there's a good result, or there's a motion that's won that you prepared some of the work, but you didn't get to argue it, if the attorney you're working for doesn't say a word to you about that, that's going to affect, I think, going forward. If at least it's going to affect the relationship. We're all professionals. It shouldn't affect the effort and everything else. We would like to think that it doesn't. But on the other hand, if you do a really good job on a brief and somebody else argues it and wins the argument, and the first thing they do is come down and tell you what a great job you did and you were the biggest part and all this stuff, man, that makes me feel like $1 million. It makes me want to work twice as hard, and really, it's just good all the way around. It's the right thing to do. So, again, you got to take the criticism on your own, handle it. But, the praise or the success is something that I can tell you at this place, and probably every other place where there are attorneys doing trial work, nobody's doing it on their own. It's always a joint effort, a team effort. All right. Well, great session, great advice. That wraps things up for this session. On behalf of Elizabeth and Paul and Megan and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you on the next episode of The Jury is Out.
The Jury is Out is brought to you by the Simon Law Firm. Share your comments with John and Eric at comments@thejuryisout.law, and tune into other podcasts in the Simon Law Firm library, including Heels in the Courtroom and Results Don't Lie. And subscribe today, because the best lawyers never stop learning.